Hello, and welcome to this video on control flow in Python. In this video, we'll cover the basics of how to control the flow of a Python program using conditional statements and loops. We'll explore how to use if-else statements to make decisions in our code, and how to use for and while loops to repeat code until a certain condition is met. But first, let's take a quick look at Boolean values and comparison operators. Part 1. Boolean values and comparison operators. In Python, a Boolean value is a special data type that can have one of two possible values, true or false. Boolean values are used to represent the truth or falsehood of a statement. We can create Boolean values in Python using comparison operators. Comparison operators are used to compare two values in Python. The result of a comparison operation is always a Boolean value, either true or false. Now is a good time to talk about comments since I'm already using them. In Python, you can comment code by adding a hashtag in front of your comment. Everything following the hashtag has the only purpose of documenting your code and will be ignored by the Python interpreter. In this screen, we can see the less than, the equals, and the more than or equal to operators. Notice how the equals comparison operator requires two equal signs, otherwise it becomes the assignment operator. There are also the more than, different, and less than or equal to operators. Part 2. If-else statements. Now that we've covered Boolean values and comparison operators, let's take a closer look at if-else statements. If-else statements are used to make decisions in our code based on certain conditions. We can think of if-else statements as a way to ask a question in our code and then perform different actions depending on the answer. To create an if-else statement in Python, we use the if keyword followed by a condition. If the condition is true, the code inside the if block is executed. If the condition is false, the code inside the else block is executed. If we run the code shown, we can see that it correctly prints x is positive, and if we alter x to a negative value, it prints x is not positive. Sometimes we may need to check multiple conditions in our code. To do this, we can use elif statements. Elif stands for else if, and it allows us to check additional conditions after an initial if statement. To create an elif statement in Python, we use the elif keyword followed by a condition. If the initial if condition is false, Python will check the next elif condition. If that condition is true, the code inside the elif block is executed. If that condition is also false, Python will move on to the next elif block if there is one, or the else block if there is one. If we run this code, we can see it correctly prints x is between 26 and 50. Part 3. While loops. While loops are a type of loop in Python that allow you to execute a block of code repeatedly until a certain condition is met. In this example, we create a variable I and initialize it to 0. The while loop checks if I is less than 5. If it is, the code inside the loop is executed, which prints the value of I and then increments I by 1. The loop continues executing until I is no longer less than 5, at which point the loop terminates. By the way, there is a shorthand way to write I equals I plus 1, which is I plus equals 1. If we run this code, we can see it prints all the numbers that are less than 5, starting from 0. To avoid infinite loops, it's a good practice to include a fail-safe mechanism in your while loops. For example, you could include a counter variable that increments with each iteration of the loop, and then add a condition to terminate the loop if the counter exceeds a certain threshold. In this example, we use the keyword break to stop the while loop. Another way to do this would be with the OR operator. There are two logical operators in Python, the OR operator and the AND operator. The OR operator checks if either of the two conditions is true, and if either of them are, the whole expression evaluates to true. The AND operator requires the two conditions to evaluate to true for the whole expression to evaluate to true. Part 4. For loops. Next, let's look at for loops. For loops are used to repeat code a certain number of times. We can think of them as a way to iterate over a sequence of values in our code. If we run this code, we can see it prints all the values starting from 1 that are less than 11. More precisely, in this code, we're using the range function to generate a sequence of numbers from 1 to 10. The for loop iterates over this sequence, and the code inside the loop prints each number. Now let's pause for a little challenge. Write a program that keeps reading two numbers from the user. If the sum of the two numbers is more than 50, it prints the sum between them. If the sum between them is negative, it prints negative sum. Otherwise, if the sum is between 0 and 50 inclusive, it prints got sum between 0 and 50 and terminates the program. Part 5. Break and continue statements. The break statement is used to exit a loop early, before the loop condition is met. When the break statement is encountered inside a loop, the loop is immediately terminated, and the program continues executing any code that follows the loop. Here's an example. In this example, the for loop iterates over the numbers 0 through 9. However, when I is equal to 5, the break statement is encountered and the loop is immediately terminated. If we run this code, we see the output is the numbers starting from 0 and stopping before 5. The continue statement, on the other hand, is used to skip over one iteration of a loop. When the continue statement is encountered inside a loop, the current iteration of the loop is immediately terminated and the program continues with the next iteration. Here's an example. In this example, the for loop iterates over the numbers 0 through 9. However, when I is an even number, the continue statement is encountered and the current iteration of the loop is immediately terminated, so it outputs only the odd numbers. The break and continue statements can be used in both while and for loops. They provide a convenient way to modify the behavior of loops and can be very useful in certain situations. It's important to use them judiciously, however. Overuse of these statements can make your code harder to read and understand. It's generally a good practice to use these statements sparingly and only in situations where they provide a clear benefit. That's it for this video on control flow in Python. We've covered the basics of how to use Boolean values and comparison operators, if-else and elif statements, and for and while loops to control the flow of a Python program. We've also explored how to use break and continue statements to stop a loop early or skip over certain iterations. Thanks for watching, and happy coding! Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in future videos.